Is that coming through all right?
Yep.
All right. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining me in the Natural History Society of Maryland tonight to learn about the black-crowned night herons. A little bit about me before we jump in. Like Bronwyn said, I've gotten into birding fairly recently. I totally missed the boat getting into it during 2020, but that's okay. I moved to Baltimore for work, and I've lived in Fells Point since 2019. So I've been kind of in the area for going on a decade. Um, I lived across the street from Thames Street Park for about 2 years, and I knew about the birds sort of tangentially. I knew towards later summer they would get on the cars and that they made a big stink at the park, but I never really paid too much mind to them. And then in 2023, my ornithologist friend came to visit, and he was, I wouldn't say talking trash, but he wasn't too thrilled at the prospects of urban birds in a city after being out in the field for his studies. So when I took him out to the park to see the herons, and he kind of went, he completely blown away. I knew there was something special about these birds, and I will say if you ever want to get into birding, it's really great to go with someone who knows about the bird because then you can just watch and look at them do their bird things while they tell you what's happening. All right. So after I got into birding, I pretty much knew that these herons were special, and I was curious just how many birds were in this tiny park. Um, Most of the time, you see two or three. Maybe you see a handful on the ground, but I started out essentially being super excited about birds, and I just wanted to count the herons. And so I started going out um, in the spring of 2024, and just went out with my binoculars and a notebook, and I started counting herons. And so before we jump into that story, we'll kind of move along. If you don't know or you're unfamiliar, uh, Fells Point is that little green neighborhood down here. And then Thames Street Park is this little half a block pocket park, kind of in the heart of Fells Point. Everything else around it is surrounded by houses and converted warehouses into apartments, etc. And that's where they live. Uh, so, black-crowned night herons, what are they? Black-crowned night herons are sort of a small, stocky heron. As their name suggests, they are mostly nocturnal. However, when they're nesting and in the full swing of parenting, there's not a whole lot of sleep going on. It's quite active day and night, excluding maybe the peak of the afternoon. Um, they are the most widespread species of heron in the world, being found in every continent except Antarctica and Australia. They are migratory in the northern hemisphere, and they are year-round residents in the southern hemisphere. One thing to note about these herons is they do migrate, but they don't migrate all that far. Nothing like, say, hummingbirds going all the way from one end of the continent to the other. These guys will generally stick much closer to their nesting grounds if they are migrating, though some individuals may be found as far south as Florida or the Caribbean, because generally, when they do migrate, they don't migrate as a pack. They like to go their own way or fly in a small posse. Um, so that's the black crowned night heron, and they've been living in Fells Point at Thames Street Park at least since 2012. The trees themselves that they live in are Japanese Zelkova trees, and there's a row of them kind of there's a bunch of about 9, 10 trees at the park that are the primary nesting trees, and um, we're not entirely sure why they've chosen the park. Um, they don't do interviews. We've tried, but they just kind of squawk and stare. But we sort of have an idea. We can deduce that they're here because they don't really have another choice. In these two pictures, you can see one being a nice fertile wetlands, lots of green, lots of water. The herons are primarily shore birds and feed on aquatic invertebrates, fish, snakes, but they're also generalists, and the marsh has everything they need. Unfortunately, through much of the Chesapeake, we see developed coastal ways, such as the right side picture, um, being that there's also other types of herons and other types of birds that compete for similar resources and nesting areas. When we have developed coastal ways, there's more competition for less and less space. And so we think that the reason that they're in fells is because they don't want to compete for what's around with the other birds. And the park itself offers a nice big canopy so that they can nest colonially um, without having to compete too much. Now, one other thing about it is that it's somewhat protected, um, despite, or while there is like noise and stuff, cars and screaming people and kids and events, they don't seem to be too bothered by that because they keep coming back. Um, all right. So this is my third year coming out to track the herons. Each year they return in late March through April. This year they returned on March 23rd, and then they kind of pieced out for almost 2 weeks. We didn't see them, and for a second there, I was getting concerned they weren't coming back. But then on April 3rd, they came back, and what they do is you have individuals that are mated and paired up already, and you have individuals that are single. And so, individuals that already have a partner, they may not migrate with them. So, what they'll do is they'll come back and sort of stake out a spot in a tree and hunker down, like the one in this top right corner here. And they'll wait for their partner to return while keeping other birds away from their nesting spot. If you look in the bottom left, you'll see an individual. Um, if they're single, they might come back early enough to snag an old nest from the previous season, or they might have to start building their own nest from scratch in a different part of the tree. But essentially, that March period, they all come and hang out and wait for the temperatures to change and warm up, and they start building their nests. Um, so that involves ripping sticks from all the surrounding trees and from the surviving nests that no one claims. Um, we call this sort of the storm of the sticks, if you will, constantly dropping sticks, ripping sticks, and they're flying back and forth all over the park. It's quite a bonanza of activity, especially in April. All right. So for those herons that aren't mated, call them bachelors. And so the way it works for black crowned night herons is to attract a mate. A male will select a spot in a tree and build a platform of sticks. And generally, they get better at this the older they are. But essentially, what they do is they choose their spot, and then when there's females around, they'll do this dance where they sort of go from one foot to the next, extend their neck, and they have this sort of it's almost like a gravelly coo, if you will. It's an abnormal heron sound, but essentially what they're trying to do is win your attention over. Um, and you see this primarily from April through May. While there's activity going, you have bachelors dancing and building platforms. You have other couples that are already mated and get right to work building their nest. But the fun thing about these bachelors is that they're in their bright mating season plumage, and their legs, if you notice, are kind of a dark orange, dark pink, and their feathers are spectacularly white, and their eyes are even more spectacularly red. All of these changes for the males sort of happens um, while they're waiting for a mate, but females will return. They don't typically change until they find a mate. One thing to note, black crowned night herons, like most herons, are not sexually dimorphic, so the males and the females will look essentially the same, roughly the same size. Unless you're weighing them, it's difficult to tell who's who. All right. So once a male has successfully won the attention of a female, if you look in this first photo to the left, um, a male will lure, that's probably not the right word, invite a female heron over to check out their nest or platform. And they do this by extending their neck and flaring their neck feathers and their head feathers and their long white uh, ponytail, also known as occipital plumes. Um, and if a female is interested, she'll come over and she'll get into the platform and start sort of pulling at branches, tugging on branches, checking out the structural security of the male's handiwork. And if she's satisfied, she and he will cross bills. It almost looks like they're kissing, but what they do is they kind of nibble at each other's bills, and then they bill clabber, which is they sort of open and shut their beaks really quick, and they'll extend their neck and flare their feathers, and then cross their necks together with each other, like is happening here. While this is going on, there's all sorts of squawks and screams. They don't quite sound too scary, but if you don't know what's going on above you, it does sound pretty jarring, especially in a city park, to be hearing such guttural screams. Once they finish up with their courtship and they've basically confirmed they're together, they will spend either the next day, next few days, sometimes up to a week, building up their nest. The female will assume the role of building the nest, while the males will be the ones to go fetch the sticks. And they essentially keep up that uh, role of work through their eggs hatching. Um, and during this time is when they will fertilize the eggs. Black crowned night herons lay their eggs asynchronously, meaning that they don't lay their eggs all at the same time and their eggs don't hatch all at the same time. And here we see a female whispering into the ear of a male about, hey, let's get some sticks and build this pad up. And so generally a mated pair, to the left, you'll see them kind of hanging out in the nest near each other like this, while they're still building up the nest and while they're still working on fertilizing eggs. Um, Other times, and especially once all the eggs have been laid, you'll see many of them perched on branches, either sleeping or grooming. Those are the top two activities that the night herons partake in outside of their duties, building and laying on the eggs. Um, Here we see, you can see that they're quite contortionate. They prefer branches fresh off the tree. They don't tend to go for sticks or loose sticks on the ground. Um, we're lucky enough at Thames Street Park that they have plenty of trees to choose from with many branches to choose from, um, especially in year-round resident type populations. They have been known to absolutely destroy the surrounding trees looking for branches. Luckily for us, there's plenty of trees they don't nest in that they can source branches from. And this type of activity is most prevalent through April and into May. Um, this is kind of the best time to go see the herons flying around the park. Um, I think it's just absolutely fascinating watching how they attack a branch. They'll go for the same branch over and over, but they're not totally insane. They will change their tactics up and choose different branches if they are struggling with one in particular. And while these pictures do make them look quite majestic, um, when you're watching them at the park, it's a lot of fun because they look serious, and some people have said they look scary and angry. But when you just spend time at the park watching them, you can tell they're just kind of goobers, awkwardly jumping from branch to branch, and you know, slipping and pulling too hard and not having a good enough hang on the branch. So I think it really, I think it softens their image. So definitely, if you haven't made it down to the park, you should, uh, to watch these guys crawl around the trees. And then we have some more. So through this time, yeah, through this time is generally when all the herons are coming back. They tend to arrive um, through April, through May, and a little bit into June. But generally by mid-June, they have um, stopped coming to the park and starting on mating and nesting. Um, so once they've successfully coupled up and they've gotten their nest to a point, they fertilize their eggs, and they generally lay in the wild. They're typically laying anywhere from 3 eggs to 5 eggs. There have been instances of up to 7 eggs. That's generally going to be a place that is flush with food. At Thames Street Park, our average is 3 eggs per clutch, but we typically range from 2 to 4 eggs per clutch. And we did have one nest last year that had 5 chicks, and all of them did grow up old enough to be seen, but it was a fiercely competitive nest, and only one of them made it out of there. Um, One thing about herons, especially the black-crowned night herons, is there's a lot of fratricide, and pretty much from the day you're hatched, you're in competition with your siblings for survival. The parents have to feed upwards of 7 times per day per chick, for each of them to grow up healthy and be able to survive. Um, that gets harder as the season goes on, and the chicks are growing up. And one other thing is that the black-crowned night herons switch off duties of incubating eggs. So while one is laying on the nest and keeping the eggs incubated, the other one might be out either hanging out in a tree within the park, or they might be out around the harbor under a dock in other trees. But generally, once those eggs are laid, um, the parents are switching off duties every few hours, and every time they switch off, they have another sort of courtship ceremony where they're flaring their feathers and squawking at each other and making sure that um, they're on the same page. And here you see a lot of intimate whispering on the left, and then on the right, we have a nest pair, but you'll notice that one of them doesn't look like the others. While it does look young, it is a fully mature adult. So what happens with night herons is we count their age in springs, and so by their third spring, they're 2 years old or coming up on 2 years old. That's generally when they're able to start mating and nesting, but their adult plumage doesn't necessarily change at the same time, and it can sometimes take upwards of 3 years for that plumage to fully come in. And so last year we saw 4 what we call subadults, which is they're sexually mature, but they haven't changed their plumage. And typically in those instances, it is the females that are the younger ones, and the males are the older ones with the adult plumage. But one interesting thing is last year we had 2 subadults creating a nest pair, and we can essentially infer from that that they were first-time parents, the both of them. And as many first times you try something, you don't quite succeed, and so unfortunately, they were not successful at raising any of their chicks to survival. But kind of on that tangent of the subadult, you can see in this right-hand upper corner, you can sort of see how their plumage is less spotty than it is on the wings, and their tails are or I guess the tips of their wings are getting blacker. So this is kind of indicative of their changing plumage from the juvenile to the adult. Sometimes you can see a little bit darker cap as that comes in, and their bills will also get blacker as well. So once they lay their eggs, it takes about 23 days to incubate. During that time, the parents are switching off, and the eggs will hatch typically within 23 to 26 days. We've ranged this year, we've seen some hatching as many as in 30 days. And so essentially what that means is you have chicks that are much bigger than the other ones, and unfortunately they do tend to beat up on the smaller chicks. But they're starting out their eggs, they're hatching out from an egg about the size, a medium-sized chicken egg, and they come out weighing less than 50 grams, covered in this brownish gray downy feathers, and they can't support their heads, and they can't thermoregulate. And so, especially those first 3 days, they're extremely vulnerable to the outside weather. It's been particularly challenging both last spring and this spring, through both April and May. With the wild temperature swings we've had, many of the chicks that are born kind of late May have struggled to survive the downward swings in temperature. Generally, we see the first chicks of the year hatching in the beginning of May. And so typically, at least for the last 2 years, we've seen chicks born within that first to second week of May survive, whereas the ones in later May are caught right in the middle of those temperature swings, and um, they don't unfortunately make it. But the herons are growing quickly. They go in about 6 weeks from that little puff ball to almost 2 pounds and 2 feet tall. And so, pretty much every day that the herons are at the park, something is changing. We have, let's see, in the left photo, you can see the one with its big mouth agape. That one is probably about a week old, maybe just under a week. And then in the right hand picture, the largest fellow there, that one's probably pushing a week and a half to 2 weeks. So you can see there's quite a range of sizes all in the same nest, and they're all going for that poor parent's mouth. Essentially, how they feed is the heron chicks will lunge at the parents and bite their beaks. And when their beaks are bitten by the children, it triggers a reflex for the parents to regurgitate their food. Within the first week or so, that food seems to be somewhat pre-digested, whereas after a week, uh, the food is more whole fish, and the fish just get bigger and bigger as they grow. So here we can see to the left, this little fellow is probably about 2 weeks old, beginning of 2 weeks. Oh. And to the right, we can see two chicks. They're starting to get their brown feathers replacing their downy feathers, but their wings are still very clearly in development. And then roughly 3 weeks old, they're covered in feathers. Their feathers are still coming in. They all have those frizzy hairs up top. But at this point, they're much more resilient to the outside temperatures and do much better with the temperature swings. Once they get to be about 4 weeks old, they fledge. And black crowned night herons are kind of unique in that they fledge before they even know how to fly, where they are generally found in nature, which is wetlands and marshes and all of that. Um, at about 4 weeks, the chicks will leave the nest and create little posses of fledglings and roam around the wetland floors and jump off of things, flap their wings, chase bugs, chase little tadpoles. Basically, a living classroom figuring out how to be a heron. At Thames Street Park, we don't have that option. As you may recall from that image of Fells Point, there's just a tiny half block rectangle of trees and anything that they can really run around in. Um, so, what happens for the chicks at Thames Street Park is starting from about 3 weeks to 4 weeks, they start branching out from their nests and they start climbing to different branches, different areas of their trees. But what also happens is they might take a tumble or they might take a jump and miss, and they end up on the ground. And so, from about 3 weeks to 6.5 weeks, if they're on the ground, um, there's no way for them to get back up in the trees. And so, what ends up happening is the chicks are stranded, and without our help, our intervention, the chicks are pretty much doomed to dehydration, stress, starvation, potentially an off leash dog, or a stray cat. And so what we've started doing is getting the word out about these guys. And so where I was just before this talk, or as this talk was starting, I got a call from someone who was at the park, and they called a number to get help with the heron. And I work closely with Phoenix Wildlife Center up in Baldwin, Maryland. And so they directed them to me. And so as we were sitting down for this talk, I got the call to go run out there and pick it up. And so that's happened now. This is the 17th chick of the season so far that we've picked up from the park. It'll spend the evening in my garage where it's dark and quiet. And in the morning, I'll bring it up to Phoenix, who will check its vitals, make sure it's got fluids and food, and we'll rehab it until it's about 7 weeks old, at which point they'll release it up near Pretty Boy Reservoir. Um, so back to the herons that don't fall out. If they're lucky enough to make it to week 6 without falling out of the trees, they are pretty much let's just say they're almost home free. Essentially, from week 6 is when they start really practicing their flight muscles and actually taking test flights. So we'll see them jumping from the trees down to the park floor. They might use the park fencing and the benches as little perching spots and launch pads to work on their flights. And the other nice thing that they do when they get to be about 6+ weeks old is they jump down and they eat up all the dried fish that's been dropped from the nests above. So it's kind of like they're cleaning up after themselves. But after about 7 weeks, um, the herons are pretty much left up to their own devices. The parents stop coming back to the park, and the herons have to figure out where the water is, which luckily is just a block down the street, but it's hard to know when all you've known is that little park. And so what we see from about week 7 to week 8 is they kind of hang out at the park for sleeping, but they'll venture further and further out towards the water. If it's rained, there's a bunch of puddles that collect in the road on Thames Street, and they can be found practicing their fishing there and bathing as well. Um, Back to kind of the rescuing. Like I mentioned, I work with Phoenix Wildlife Center pretty much exclusively. They've been working with these herons since about 2013 or so. We rescued about 10 in the summer of 2024. We rescued 16 chicks all of 2025. And this year, tonight is number 17. This year, last week, from the 13th to the 20th, we ended up collecting 11 chicks from the park and bringing them up to Phoenix. You might wonder, but why don't we just put them back up in the trees from where they came? The unfortunate thing is those nests are way taller in the trees than they seem, even with an extension ladder. So one, it's very difficult to get them back up in the nest, and then two, for the most part, if you don't know which nest it belongs to, putting it back up in the tree, especially if it's already sort of stressed and dehydrated or hungry, they kind of get stuck where you put them, and they don't really make it. The other risk of putting them back up is you put them too close to a nest that isn't theirs, and the parent of that nest might come and harass that chick. So essentially, what we've come to the conclusion of is if they're on the ground, essentially we do need to collect them and bring them to the rescue in order for them to survive. Um, let's see. I think that's pretty much it for the herons. The park itself is very small. We have that row of trees where they raise their young. It's about 10 trees. The rest of the park is consumed by a children's park and playground and a big sort of gazebo type structure. So there's not a whole lot of habitat for these birds. So in the fall of 2024, I made a friend who is big into native plant gardening, and together we applied for a grant um, to essentially build a little garden slash habitat for the herons underneath their nesting trees, which before that was just a bunch of gravel. And so you'd have these chicks falling out from their nest onto the gravel and then having nowhere to hide or, you know, falling 20, 30 feet and hitting nothing but hard stone. So uh, we ended up getting the funds, and this spring we had some volunteer events where a ton of community members came out and we planted a bunch of native plant plugs, and we've been caring for that garden through this season, and it's been growing up, and it's not quite thick enough yet to catch any herons falling and really break their fall, but it's provided a number of the chicks that have fallen this year with an immediate place to hide and find some sort of security, which is incredibly helpful to their well-being because stress is especially detrimental to them at that age. They can just die from being stressed. So it has been cool to see chicks sort of hiding in there and figuring out their next move while they uh, await either rescue or not. But luckily, especially this being year three and the community awareness, we've been able to get a response to any downed herons much quicker than in previous years, and we're excited to continue that network. Um, we've also got funds that we're going to put an informational sign up at the park to discuss the herons, and so if you come back next year, you'll see that, and you can look at the herons and read up on them on your own time. But that's pretty much it. Um, Open it up for questions or
Kevin, this has been fabulous. Thank you. You unshare, come back. I'll stick a spotlight on you, and then I'll open it up for Q&A. So if you have a question for Kevin, feel free to put it in the chat box. Raise your hand. I can call on you. I know that Alan said that there was one slide, there was something on the center of the chest of a bird that he was didn't know what that was. I don't know if that was.
It was kind of looked like a round kind of thing, like right in the center. It was
oh, that
right
was
after. Oh, go on.
in one of my slides.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that most likely what you're looking at is they will perch on one leg and they'll bring that other leg up and it
Uh,
kind of looks like a their hearts bursting out of their stomachs.
Okay, got that. Timothy is asking, what's the population of the colony, and have you seen? I mean, you've been studying it for a couple of years now. Is it the population remaining steady? Is it growing? Is it decreasing?
Yeah, it's been interesting to see the changes. So in 2024, we had about 82 individuals, adult individuals, and we had from my recollection, we had about 32 nest attempts and I believe 29 nests that had chicks. Um, we had, I think 64 or so chicks were hatched and about 30 something survived. In 2025, we had an explosion of activity, an estimated 120 distinct adults, and we had 62 nest attempts, and 57 of those nests produced chicks, at least one chick that survived. I'm sorry, 57 nests that produced at least one chick. Of those, we had, I believe, 33 nests had at least one chick that made it all the way from an egg to leaving the park in their own power. And we had a total of 168 hatchlings. Of that, 54 of them survived, with 16 of those surviving through our rescue efforts at Phoenix. And then this year, we have had 45 distinct nest attempts, and then four or five restarts where a nest pair started and they lost their eggs and they came back and started again. We've seen about 100, roughly 100 adult individuals, including nest pairs and bachelors, and about 3 subadults. And we've got about 80, 82 chicks that have hatched. So it's been interesting that it hasn't been consistent, either growing or shrinking. It's been different every year. One thing that was particularly different about this year was the weather going from 80 degrees for 3 days down to the 40s and 50s. The herons didn't like to do anything below 70 degrees. So when it would shoot back down, they would all sort of puff out their feathers and hunker down. And it was interesting feedback this year. Everyone was saying they look bigger and healthier this year. But I think what people were seeing was the herons puffing out their feathers during the cold.
Jackie's asking, are the birds threatened or endangered? And if not, why rescue the birds that fall from the nest if this is natural and normal mortality?
Sure. So they are, um, I think, I don't think they're technically threatened or endangered, but they are in decline up and down the eastern seaboard. Populations from New York, New Jersey, Maryland, down the East Coast are all in decline. And so that's something, even though they are the most widespread heron in the world, depending on location, they could be doing just fine versus in decline. Or even in Chicago, there's a single population in Illinois, and they are endangered there. And so it just kind of depends on the area. And then second is they fall from the nest to natural mortality. So in their natural habitat, they're nesting anywhere from on the ground up to about 30, 40 feet. But most of the time, their habitat allows for them to fall without suffering life-threatening injuries. And then at the same time, they're able to climb back up into their nesting trees, or at least a nesting tree. Whereas at Thames Street Park, it's not really a natural habitat. You have these Zelkova trees, and they have, their trunks extend anywhere from 5 to 8 feet up without any horizontal branching and no understory for them to climb. And so, while it is normal for these birds to fall out of their nests, it is not natural that there's no way for them to climb back up. And so uh, that's kind of the main driver as to why I involve myself to pick up the birds is yes, the chicks do die naturally sometimes in these ways, but being such a modified habitat, and especially because humans are the ones that change that habitat, I think it's incumbent on us to help assist with those chicks that are helpless otherwise.
Thank you. And Barbara asks, where do the herons go when the nesting is finished? And when does that typically happen? And are you banding them?
So once the chicks are pretty much grown up and on their own, the parents and the chicks hang around in the city, at least in the Inner Harbor area, through to late October into November. The latest I've seen herons here is up to a week before Thanksgiving or so, late November. Um, they are, I think I mentioned this, they don't necessarily migrate together and they don't necessarily migrate all that far, but it kind of just depends. The chicks that were born this year, they will probably stick around the closest to this area. They, I don't even know if the length that they will leave is technically migration, but they leave the Inner Harbor by late November. And then in the meantime, if you're down here walking along the water at any of the waterside parks or even Patterson Park, there's a chance you might see one perching during the day. They'll also go back to that nocturnal behavior. So most of the time they're in the trees at that point. Um, and we are not banding them currently. There's been some discussions about doing that. There's a lot of sort of permitting involved, but I, that is something we're potentially moving towards, at least with the chicks that are rescued. It's much easier to band them than it is to catch an adult. Even the chicks put up a fight, but that is something that we're hopefully going to do in the next season or two.
Great. Katie wants to know what their diet is in Fells Point.
Sure. I'd say primarily Menhaden. There's a bunch of little schools that hang out and grow up here in the Inner Harbor. And so the majority of the carcasses we're seeing on the ground is the Menhaden, but we've also seen eels, turtles. Their black-crowned night herons are generalists. Excuse me. So they'll pretty much eat anything that wriggles and they can fit. I have seen them eat mice. I know that they eat rats. We do have a decent amount of those down here in Fells Point, and so they're certainly on the menu. Um, I've I know that they do eat others eggs of other birds, and I haven't seen that happen, but I have seen. I've Someone showed me a video that a mockingbird was seen strafing a night heron that was on a boat just looking for fish, but I think maybe a nest was close by because that mockingbird wasn't leaving it alone. But yeah, in general, any small invertebrate or vertebrate, and then this might be a little much, but I did witness this year a parent eating one of its chicks that had died. So
It happens. Um, Alex asks, how did the Thames Street Park become so popular with the herons if it doesn't closely match their natural habitat?
sure. Again, they don't do interviews, so we don't really know for sure. But the area of Fells Point used to be a tidal marsh, and I know even before this park was put in, there's records of night heron colonies in the area. I believe, just based on what I've seen, is that collection of trees at Thames Street Park is one of the sort of the tightest canopies group of trees around the harbor. That's close enough to the water that they're not terribly far. Again, they're just a half block off the water, but I suspect that it's enough trees for them to nest colonially. It's got a space that they're not competing with other herons or type birds, and they like to hunt alone, and so I think there's a lot of space within the harbor for them to all disperse and go hunt different pockets. So that's the best explanation that I can uh, guess at.
So Kevin, I mean, which is wonderful. You've planted some understory and some new plants underneath the trees. Have you worked with the forestry department of the city to see if there's opportunity to plant other types of trees, or is that in the
Uh,
works?
yeah, actually, I'm working with Teddy at the forestry department now. There's some spots for trees, little plots within the sidewalk that are vacant that we're looking to put some trees in, and we're looking to put some other trees within the park itself, and trees that the herons might consider using is definitely part of that thought process of which trees to plant. Um, Kind of give them more space and people more shade. So.
Oh, good. Alan, you have your hand up.
Got a few questions. First one, did I mishear you when you were talking about the chicks competing for food that only one survive, or did I may have misheard you there?
Yeah, so they're all competing with each other for food. Basically, only one of them really gets to eat at a time. Um,
Oh,
Most of the time, if they're fighting over something, they're either one of them's getting that piece of fish or it's falling over the nest. And then the competition between siblings does lead to many times only the largest one sort of outcompeting the rest. We do have a couple nests that do get all of their chicks that hatch through to juvenilehood, but typically, if especially if we have a nest of like four, three or four, at least one of them's falling. So falling or not making it. So
okay, but more than one is surviving generally if there's like four or five or six outside of the area here being born.
yeah,
Okay. And then so going back to the thing that was it was in an earlier slide. I saw the one where the claw was coming out of the chest, but there was one, it almost looked like a little circle disc on the chest. It was around the time when right after they had sort of been doing a little bit of the mating, there was a slide with three images on it, and on the right image was like a little circle disc in the middle of the. It was like a white chested, and it was like a white kind of a disc in the middle of the chest. So, might have been like your, I don't know, 10th, 11th, 12th slide, something in there, maybe.
gotcha. Let's see if I can share it again really quick.
It was like right after they had built the platform, started building the nest. They were sort of going into mating stuff with each other. Yeah, so keep going. Not there. Not there. Not there. Not there. Not there. So maybe it was further back. Maybe further back than
Let's start from the beginning. How's that?
Oh, don't know if you know, have to go. Okay, keep going. Keep going. Keep going. Go. Oh, go back. Wait. No. Oh, maybe. Yeah, so I guess that was part of the. I'm seeing that little disc below the claw in that right image there.
Uh,
It just looked like a very, I thought I didn't know what it was. Okay, last question.
yeah,
Yeah, that's what I saw. Okay. So last question. Usually, you know, I ask people kind of how they got interested, but we kind of know a little bit of your origin story about how you got interested in this, but maybe there are some details like was it just like a quantum thing that change that happened when you went out with your ornithologist friend or like you and what were you right before that what were you doing right before that that all of a sudden there was this change so I sort of want to know that moment when what happened.
sure. Yeah. So I had been living in Fells Point for about 3 years by that, or 4 years by that point, in my 20s. So a lot of going to the bars and partying on weekends and waking up later and later. And, eventually the hangovers kind of take your whole weekend out, right? So I was sort of in the middle of moving away from that type of free time usage. And I was also kind of just realizing how little nature I was getting in my life at that point. I'm right in the city. To get a lot of nature beyond just Patterson Park, I have to drive somewhere. Um, and so when I went birding with my friend who was telling me that this is this type of bird, see what it's doing it because of this. Just honestly, looking at birds close up through the binoculars kind of transported me out of the real world and into like this just this zone where all I was doing was watching herons do things or other birds do things. And I don't know, it kind of like slowed everything down, and I found it to be both exhilarating and calming at the same time. I guess you could say. I mean, it was awesome. I was hooked immediately.
So then
And
once you were
then
hooked, what was your next step? Yeah.
yeah, so then once I was hooked, it was like, well, Baltimore's actually got a ton of wildlife. All I have to do is walk out of my house with my binoculars and a sense of curiosity, and I don't have to pack up and drive somewhere. I don't have to plan ahead necessarily. I just have to grab my binoculars and go. And then that was kind of the starting point, and it wasn't probably until maybe the fall of 2023 where I really kind of thought about counting the herons, but I didn't want to jump into that until the following spring, just because I wanted to get it from start. All right, when are they getting here? All right, they get here about 10 to 15 days before April. And then what happens? At first, I was just counting herons, but then that turned into, oh, we know that they're going pretty much hanging out at the same branches all the time. And then you have their nests. And then, oh, what's happening? Looks like they're almost invisible up there in the nest. It means that they're laying on eggs. And then you come the next day and there's a little blue eggshell on the ground, and you hear this tiny, pathetic squeak. You can't see anything, but you can hear this squeak. And then, so it went from counting herons to wanting to capture them and stare at them longer, which is how I got into the photography side. And then you spend enough days in a row going to a little park and staring at the trees, and people ask, what are you taking pictures of? And then all of a sudden you're starting an Instagram and sharing what's happening. So, and then and then from there it's like people asking me about the herons, and then, hey, there's a heron on the ground, can you do something about it? And that's how I got involved with Kathy up at Phoenix Wildlife. And yeah, so it's kind of just grown from me being a random dude at the park with the camera to people know me and they know what I'm doing and they're curious and they stop and ask questions and are super interested. So it's been really cool um, to share the my curiosity and excitement of these birds with people that stop by pretty much any time I'm out there. So
So are you
yeah,
a free agent, and I mean free in every sense of the word, or do you have a day job also?
yeah, I do have a day job. That's how I support this habit. It is sometimes, I'm spending my afternoons in front of a computer screen when I wish I was craning my neck staring up in the trees. But it's the starting with the heron. It really kind of gave me enough dopamine and cheer to be able to sit in front of a desk for 8 hours.
All right, last question, and then I'll stop being your mother. Um, would you want to do this as like a regular job? And I'm imagining there's got to be jobs out there related to this kind of thing.
Um, yes, it would be really cool to be able to do this. I mean, I think personally Baltimore has enough birds of all different variety that, I could maybe do something. I have met a few professional wildlife photographers, and they all seem to have a trust fund in common. But yeah, no, there's great birds. I've actually been working with a group that's making kind of a wildlife documentary on the Chesapeake, and so we've been doing stuff with the herons as sort of an urban wildlife aspect to it, and there's potential there of maybe doing something like that. But it's definitely been eye-opening as to what other things I could do with it.
Thanks so much. I mean, you brought a lot to this tonight. I mean, great. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Kevin, your photography is amazing, and it's amazing because you spend so much time with the birds. So it's not just a one time. This is my opinion because you're out there, you're looking at them in to your. It's not a one time thing. Oh, I'm going to get a good shot. I'm going to get a good shot. We have a small shop at the museum. We'd love to put some of your pictures up. I don't know if you have a platform for that or not, but I know that would be great.
Yeah, no, that'd be really cool. I haven't taken a full step into sort of producing them in that respect, but that's certainly on the list, and definitely something I'm interested in doing. I think it'd be really great. Um, but yeah, that's definitely in the works, I will say, as far as make a website and printing. But
Great.
yeah, I'll reach out or we can set that up.
And then what do you do from November to March when the birds aren't there?
A lot of deep breathing exercises. Um, it's a little sad. So when they leave the park, they generally there will be some activity at the park through August. Last year they left the park at around September 6th. I'm not sure we'll get there that late at the park this year. There doesn't seem to be as big of a second wave of nests this year. But at that point, I'm usually kind of tracking over into Canton, over into Harbor East, looking for the different pockets that I know that they hang out at, see what type of pictures I can get. In those instances, that's usually when I'll get the best action shots of them fishing at the water. And then in the winter, there's a ton of great waterfowl bird watching just right off the promenade. So it's not quite the same as the herons, but it does give me a birding fix, especially you see something new, or it's kind of the same thing where I'm going almost every day, and you see different things. Like the coots are there pretty much the entire winter and fall, and then you have things like horned grebes and redheads and pintails that might show up for a couple days or a couple weeks and then they're gone. Or I've seen buffleheads. Yeah, so there's, I guess, I really like the water birds and the larger birds. They're a lot slower moving, and you can kind of just stare at them. So I do survival techniques, I guess you could say.
Got it. All right. Are there any other questions for Kevin tonight at this, our last Must Learn Thursday before summer break? Okay. Don't forget, Jane has one in July. If you need your fix on Thursday nights, it'll be a fern talk. But in the meantime, stay well, stay curious. Go visit the night herons in Fells Point. You can see Kevin, follow him on Instagram, and do all of that good stuff. I know, Kevin, you're hosting some trips out there.
Yeah, we're with Jane on Saturday at 8. We're meeting up at the park, and I'm showing off the herons. And then we're going to go over to the Robert Long house. So,
Sounds like a fun morning. All
yeah.
right, everybody. Thanks, Kevin, for sharing your story with us, and thanks for all the work that you're doing. It's wonderful, and it's great. There's enough birds out there for everybody to be that person. You're the heron guy, and what bird is everybody else going to get? So stay
Yeah,
curious,
thank you so much.
everybody. We'll see you soon. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.